How old is vintage clothing? If you have ever wondered how to define vintage clothing, you are in the right place. Let's break it down so you can understand what makes these garments special. Vintage clothing is generally considered to be garments that are at least 20 to 30 years old but less than 100 years old. This means that, as of now, vintage clothing typically includes items produced before the early 2000s. Some definitions even set the cutoff around 1990 or earlier. Clothing older than 100 years is classified as antique. The age criteria for vintage clothing can vary slightly depending on the source or collector. However, the most widely accepted range is 20 to 100 years old. For example, some collectors consider clothing vintage if it is 25 years or older. Others use 20 years as the minimum age, meaning any garment produced before 2000 qualifies as vintage today. You may have heard the term retro, which describes newer clothing designed to imitate styles from previous eras. However, these pieces are not considered true vintage. From a collectibles and antiques perspective, vintage clothing is valued not only for its age but also for its quality and craftsmanship. Many vintage garments come from periods when production was more localized, especially before the widespread shift of manufacturing to Asia in the 1990s. This localized production contributes to their desirability, as many vintage items were made in the United States or Europe and are often considered well-made and durable compared to contemporary mass-produced clothing. Identifying vintage clothing involves examining several factors beyond just age. The design and silhouette of the garment can indicate the era it was made. Fabric and construction details, such as materials, stitching, buttons, and zipper placements, can help date the piece. Labels and tags are also important. Vintage clothing often has labels from brands or manufacturers that may no longer exist or have changed. For example, Union labels indicate United States-made garments from certain decades. Sometimes, garments bear copyright years or production codes that specify their manufacturing date. Understanding these details is essential for collectors and antique hunters, especially when shopping at flea markets or antique fairs. Authentic vintage pieces can often be found at these venues. Collectors look for items that are not only old but also in good condition and representative of the fashion and cultural trends of their time. Vintage clothing is typically between 20 and 100 years old, with a strong emphasis on quality and historical significance. This age range distinguishes vintage from antique and retro, making vintage clothing a unique category within collectibles and antiques that appeals to both collectors and fashion enthusiasts.